Alright, in this video we're going to look at the basic settings for starting to use Brazil Render, and we're going to actually work through a series of options to get you acquainted with the basic sort of settings for working with Brazil Render. So this file that you see here is a basic sort of dummy file. It has, planar and also curved geometries sort of close to the ground, so you can actually kind of see some of these things. And this is the sample render file start here. Okay, and when I open it, this is basically the sort of Rhino view. This is the shaded. You can also kind of change it to rendered, etc., etc. Yeah, so this is a view that I've set, and we'll sort of slowly, get back to that. But basically, the idea is that you can change things around or move around, but then you can go down here, set view to the render view, and it'll always basically snap back to this camera view. One of the things you'll probably notice these things that are kind of in a circle or in these sort of frames. These are called safe frames, and these are sort of settings that you can set. You can turn them on or off, but basically these are tied to your rendering output aspect ratio. So in this case, for the purposes of this file, I'm rendering a smaller file, 640 by 480 pixels wide, and so this is actually the 4:3 aspect ratio that provides. And these are sort of safe frames that are kind of used in the past a little bit more, just so that you know where, let's say for example, captions or subtitles, that kind of things, those kind of things want to be in order not to be cut off by the television. It's more of an issue originally in the analog age, but in the digital age it's less of a problem. But there are basically settings that you can use to kind of control these. Right, and these are all sort of under the Rhino settings as well, so they work for any render, not just Brazil. Right. So remember that the lab computers will have Brazil installed in the 32-bit version of Rhino, not the 64. So you will have to open these in the 32-bit versions explicitly. So probably the best idea is to kind of open the 32-bit version and then open the file instead of clicking or double clicking on this file directly. To kind of give you an idea of where we're going, basically, and this will be provided on the website as well. Basically, we're going to be working through with the sort of very basic beginning default settings all the way and through a couple of different kinds of options, and these will be there. They'll be roughly named accordingly to what they are, and also there will be a PDF file that shows you the settings that we're changing, and they'll be sort of listed pretty clearly. Okay, and it shouldn't take too long if we sort of keep the render output size small, but I'll use the video to kind of show you basically where things are a bit more exactly. So the first thing you want to check is actually go over here to your render and go down here, current render, and make sure that it's set to Brazil for Rhino. By default it's probably set to this Rhino render, and so make sure that you have this and you can select it, and when you select it you'll actually get a Brazil sort of menu option up here. Okay, so this is where basically you access your other renders if you have other plugins. Like in my case, I have Maxwell for Rhino installed as well. The other sort of side effect, I guess, of this is really that when you have an active renderer here, then you'll get actually some of the things like in here, like the Brazil, under the properties tab, we'll get Brazil specific options, and I'll have Maxwell render specific options and some other things. Right, so just know that if you can't find something, you probably just check that your renderer is set to the correct one and it's active. Okay, so this needs to be on Brazil for Rhino. Okay, This is the render bar, the render button, the normal render button, and if you just click it, it'll bring this up. And actually, I think I have my older setting. Sorry, I didn't realize I actually had the ending file open, but this is the start. And so yeah, same thing, just check that you have Brazil for Rhino active. If you hit render, it should be pretty much roughly instantaneous. And so yeah, this is a pretty crappy render. This is the rendering dialog box. You'll have some options. In particular, the interesting one is this one, the clone render window. And this is actually what you can do to kind of compare between things. Once you clone it, then you can run another render if you're tweaking some settings. There are also some gamma correction options here, kind of changing the overall gamma levels, or tone mapping, contrast, things like that, as well as actually adding post. This is sort of post processing, adding ISO curves and points into it. Although the control for these are not that great, so I tend not to use them. But just so you know that it's there. So this is the first step. This is the very beginning. So to get to the next step, we'll want to find the environment editor. And so in here, under Brazil, you can go to render shortcuts and go to environment editor. And here, this is the default basic environment, which is this sort of crappy gray. And what we want to do here is actually change the background color to white. So here, background color in this sort of gray swatch, just click it and move it up and choose the white option. So basically this makes a sort of pure white background environment. Now, the active background or active sort of environment is shown by these sort of yellow frame brackets that shows you, okay, this is the current active one. Once you make more, then you'll be able to double click and kind of switch between different environments. So let's see what that does. Okay, that's pretty quick. So now I have my white environment. The next thing I want to do here is actually turn on the ground plane. And there's actually two ways to do this. One is actually to go to Brazil, create plane primitive. And this is a sort of infinite plane, and just sort of click anywhere. This basically creates a infinite horizontal plane. I guess there are both good things and bad things about this. So I actually tend not to use this that much. There's another option that's probably a little bit easier to control, and it can be found down here under the panels here. And these are a couple ones that will be using the material editor, environment editor, ground plane, but in this case the ground plane. So this is the Rhinos ground plane setting, and if you turn it on, you'll see that automatically you get this. And let me show you. Look, so you get basically a sort of infinite ground plane. And let me change the view back. Show underside or not, that basically is like, whether or not it disappears or when you're kind of looking at things from the bottom. And actually, interestingly, height above world XY. So if I render this directly, basically, you'll see that it sort of blocks out the bottom, and instead of having what we had earlier, which is the white background, you're looking at the ground, a generated ground. And if you actually start moving this up, let's say 10, I don't know what units there are here. Okay, so this is actually kind of like water, so the whole water level is rising. So if I move it down, basically you'll see this is -4. All right, so this is basically the sort of infinite ground plane, and you can actually see it update in the viewport here as well. So set it to 0. All right, just have it on. Whoops, and let me set the view back. Let's render that. Okay, so that's with the ground plane on. Now we have to get into kind of the more nitty-gritty settings. So go to the Brazil pull-down menu, render shortcut, or actually render settings, the first one. And these are the Brazil sort of settings, right? And probably a good idea to kind of try to pull it longer to kind of see. And these are a lot of the settings that come, and you'll see that there are a lot. And basically you can expand each section by clicking on the plus minus sign here. So notice specifically this one, the output size. I'm using a custom size. These are sort of more tied to video output, but basically 640, 480, and that corresponds to these safe frame, this sort of safe frame aspect ratio that I have in here, instead of this sort of widescreen, right? Because my screen is 1920 by 1080 high. Right, so you can actually switch between this just like a button, or you can enter this in. You can decide if you want to lock the image aspect ratio or not. You know, that's sort of settings that you can play with, but basically 640, 480 is a 4:3 aspect ratio. So just know that that's there. No need to worry about that. So one of the things that, and these are sort of like really dumb and simple settings that you can use if you're sort of in a hurry. However, I think it's a good idea to learn how to use the expert mode, which is down here. So click on the expert mode and you'll get essentially tons of other settings in each one of them. And we'll go into a bit more specific detail. But for now, for this step, which is sort of the third step, we just want to go to the Luma Server, which kind of controls the illumination of the scene. And let's just turn the GI, which is the global illumination, on for now, and just render that. Okay, so this is what we're looking for. We're starting to get a little bit of the photon rays sort of casting. It's not super fine yet, but you know, it's sort of starting to look more like a nice rendering. Okay, now this is just kind of show you some of the quality settings, but basically in here, the anti-aliasing. These are settings that will kind of control the very most basic quality settings. And the higher they go, the longer your render times will be. So P1 is basic, sort of like the lowest, and this goes higher and higher. And so basically it's this sort of range between the min and the max. So if we do P1 and render, okay, you'll see that things get kind of blurred out, right? The quality isn't high, but it was a lot faster. And I can clone this. Then in here, let's click P2 and render that. And so you'll see it takes a little bit longer, but if you kind of compare these side by side, you'll see that the quality of the pixelization is a lot better. And then let's try P3. Let's clone this again. So 1, 2, and 3. And so you'll see these things moving around, these sort of little frames, and generally this is what we call buckets, and they basically represent a core of your CPU. In my case, I have, and you'll see my core is getting pinged. I have a 4-core processor, but you know, each physical core has 2 logical cores, so I have 8 basically logical cores that are running at the same time to finish this rendering. So if you sort of put them side by side or kind of compare, you'll see that, okay, this is low, medium, and then high. But you could tell that the higher quality took substantially longer. And it's only this is that I'm only rendering at 680 by 480. So if you can imagine if any sort of larger resolutions, let's say double this resolution, is 4 times, basically quadruple the amount of pixels, so it would take 4 times as long, roughly. And so there's a big sort of incentive for you to kind of try to optimize your output in terms of the settings, right? So that's why we're kind of going through these experiments. Okay, I'm leaving it on P3, which is the sort of higher setting. But let's go back to the Luma server, which is most of where your illumination settings are set. And I'm going to turn the global illumination off, which is basically the sort of environmental lighting. But then direct illumination, I'm going to turn on the skylight here. Right? So the skylight is basically a sort of separate, different kind of lighting that's more based off of the sun and the sun dome. If I render that, so it's a slightly different effect. You'll see, and this is a sort of more broader diffuse lighting, like this. And we're going to kind of go through a couple things to kind of show you how to tweak these things. Now, down here, I enabled the skylight here under the direct illumination. And here you want to enable the use environment settings. And that basically will kind of, instead of using the default sort of skylight, it will actually start to apply what you have in here, which is the environment, that white sort of basic environment that we had applied. And that's what the sort of global environment is at this point. And so if you take that and run that, the differences are a little bit more subtle. But this is basically the environment multiplier set to 1.0 here. So I'm going to clone that. But here then I can say, let's make this 0.5 and render that. And so you'll see that basically you can kind of control the intensity of the overall GI setting, or the overall skylight, by tweaking that particular environment multiplier. Okay? So, but then the next step I want to do is actually turn this back to 1.0, and turn the GI on. So GI, global illumination, is on here. Skylight is on. Use environment settings 1.0, and actually in here under the QMC sampler here, this is a shorthand or abbreviation for quasi Monte Carlo, which is a type of lighting algorithm basically. So this sampler rate basically controls a sort of quality. It's also another type of like quality setting for your lighting solution. And so it's set to 5 by default. I'll change it to 10, but basically higher equals better or smoother. But it also means the times take longer. Now it might not be really easy to see depending on your geometry and depending on the size of your image, but generally this will kind of give you a bit more smoother transitions in the shadows. Right, so you'll see that took a little bit longer, right? Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at messing around with the QMC sampler rate. Now I'm going to put this rate down to 5 again. But in addition to that, I am going to turn on this. The photon map is on, regather is on, render cache is on, and change it to auto occlusion. Okay, and render that. So what this does, and you'll see it does these sort of multi-pass sort of version of it. It does it converges slowly on the lighting solution, but this is a sort of a quick way to save time when you're starting to use a high QMC rate here. And so this you can turn to, let's try that to 10 and render. And you'll see that, remember, compared to that earlier QMC 10 version that we had, this is actually a lot faster. Even though the QMC is 10, it's probably like a quarter to a third of the time. And so this is kind of a way to approximate certain parts of the calculations to speed up your render times. Well, one of the things we do with this really is we kind of use this to help actually develop and test the scene. And then eventually when we're absolutely sure that our settings are almost there, then I'll turn these off and use the basic, just like the full high quality versions. All right. So this is with the QMC sampler Skylight option off. And so let's see what happens, and let's clone this. What happens when I turn it on? So you'll see that basically parts of the scene start to get a lot brighter or a little bit more blown out. And so the next sort of part we'll actually start looking into, and it's actually good to kind of compare the effects a little bit side by side, that this one, although, here you get these sort of darker, grayer faces, whereas everything here is a little bit more evenly lighted while you're still sort of starting to get the deep shadows here. And so sometimes it's a sort of balance basically between this and the sort of effects that you're really looking for. All right, so I'm going to pause this video here, but we'll continue. There's a couple more steps and different things we're going to look at, but this is the first part of the video.